Bonzo Finance Protocol's core mission is to become the liquidity layer of Hedera.
So we have a familiar face on here today with Brady, the founder of Bonzo Finance Labs, but he's going to be doing a little bit more deeper dive into some things they have going on the platform. Brady, as always, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, as always, as well.
So we'll just dive into this, Brady. Just consider it a clean slate that there's tons of our viewers here that know who you are, but there's a lot of people out there, obviously, who don't. So let's just start off with what is your background? How'd you get into the space? And how'd Bonzo Finance Labs come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, started my career working in distributed systems that were open source. So I worked at a company called DataStax. They offered an open source database called Cassandra. I worked at a security company after that called Cloudflare, all within like a technical product marketing, open source community capacity across both. And then was reached out to by a previous boss from the first job I worked at who had started at Hedera and was building a team out. And so, joined the Hedera team pretty early on. It was around 2018. It's right when a number of different layer one networks were launching. It was pretty clear at that time that this industry was going to be a thing. It was going to be financial infrastructure for the future, and so hopped on and worked at Hedera and the Hashgraph organization for about 5.5 years, and then left at the beginning of last year to form Bonzo Finance Labs, and we're a development shop that at this time contributes to the development of the Bonzo Finance protocol. And the Bonzo Finance protocol is an open source Aave v2 blending protocol that's been adapted to Hedera and is available on the Hedera mainnet.
Let's dive into that a little bit. What's the mission of Bonzo Finance as a protocol, of which, of course, Bonzo Finance Labs is one of the major contributors?
Yeah, so Bonzo Finance Protocol's core mission is to become the liquidity layer of Hedera. And what Bonzo Finance started with was filling a gap in the ecosystem that was very clear at the time for a need for lending and borrowing or decentralized credit markets. So, we had liquid staking through Stater Labs. There's multiple decentralized exchanges like Saucer Swap and H Suite. And, in any functioning economy, you have to have lending and borrowing. And I view these networks through the lens of each of them are kind of their own economy. You have a national currency that exists. So for Hedera, it's like HBAR. For Ethereum, it's ETH. You have governance, and you have all of these businesses or protocols that are set up within that economy that allow people to transact and offer various services. And so decentralized lending was one that was missing. And that was sort of a wedge to be able to bring that online and make that available to the Hedera ecosystem. And it's doing well. We have around $57 million in total value locked. Significant increases recently in USDC. But to tie into sort of that overarching mission of becoming the liquidity layer of Hedera, there's more protocols and products that can be brought in under that same vision that help support liquidity initiatives across the network. And so one of the ones that we're working through right now that is going to go live within Q3 of this year is Bonzo Vaults, which is liquidity management and strategy vaults that route liquidity across the ecosystem.
Well, one of the things that I love about the concept of Web3 lending in general, it starts with collateral. So it starts with wealth compared to the traditional banking system where it starts with debt. The money comes into existence when you take that loan. This is flipping all of that on its head and starting with that collateral, starting with that wealth in the very beginning. I like that idea. It's something, as somebody who's been following, monetary history and banking history, it's just interesting for me to see how the way lending has been done throughout history is really being flipped on its head. But let's dive into those vaults a bit. Who do you think is going to be the main users and audience for those vaults?
Yeah, so we see three primary users for Bonzo Vaults. So the first category of user is going to be retail and institutional users. So users that are, they're holding liquidity. They want to be able to put that liquidity to work. They want to be able to earn yield on it. For those individuals, they can go to a vault and they can supply liquidity that they're holding of many different types of assets. Depending on what each vault offers as part of its strategy, they can supply the liquidity to that vault. And then it actively manages it and routes it to various protocols across the DeFi ecosystem. So that's the first bucket, is users that are really looking for yield and maximizing yield and being able to allow their liquidity to be managed automatically. The second group are developers. And with Bonzo Vaults, any developer who knows Solidity and views the Bonzo Vaults documentation can actually build out vault strategies that take advantage of any protocol that exists in the Hedera ecosystem. So, in many cases, there are institutions that have institutions or hedge funds, and they have like quants on board. And these institutions are trying to put their liquidity to work. And they have all of these various strategies that they use in DeFi ecosystems that have multiple steps as part of it. Instead of having to go through that manual process and active monitoring and oftentimes swapping or lending and borrowing or rebalancing liquidity within a pool, a vault can be built that automates that process for them. And not only does it support their initiatives for managing liquidity and trying to maximize yield, but as the strategist and the deployer of the vault, they actually earn a vault strategist fee for anybody who comes in and uses it. And tying that back to that first category of retail and institutional users, in this scenario, it kind of allows for institutional grade strategies made available to users who maybe aren't as sophisticated, which I think is a really great value for folks across the ecosystem. And then for the third category, we view ecosystem projects and token launches as this other group of individuals that are a persona for vaults. So let's say you are a new DeFi protocol that's launching on the Hedera network, and you've gone through like Orbit, for example, as your launch pad. When you launch this DeFi protocol, it's often that you're going to need to be able to attract more liquidity to that protocol and bootstrap that liquidity to get things going. What can be done is vaults can be created that route liquidity to this new protocol and have strategies that help to not only maximize yield from the protocol, but also you can incentivize at the vault layer itself. So new protocol launches, let's say that new protocol has a token, they can apply liquidity incentives to a vault and incentivize bootstrapping liquidity for their new protocol to kick things off.
So, Brady, you gave a really good example of what one of these vaults might look like yesterday in DeFi Corner. I'd love you to run through that again, but also go into some of the other strategies that we could see come out of these vaults.
Yeah, so I think one of the initial strategies that just makes a lot of sense as like a foundational layer is being able to do active management of liquidity within a Saucer Swap V2 pool. So Saucer Swap V2 pools are essentially Uniswap V3, which is concentrated liquidity. And if you've gone into Saucer Swap V2 to supply liquidity, or you have played around with Uniswap V3, there's a degree of complexity when it comes to supplying and actively managing that liquidity. So you go in and there's ranges that you set for the token pair for a specific pool. The tighter the concentration that you can get within that range, the more yield that you can earn from trading fees, but the more active management you have to do. And so what one strategy is for these vaults is to actively manage concentrated liquidity in Saucer Swap V2 pools. And you could launch a vault, for each of the V2 pools that exist. And it'll probably start out with just a few of them at first. But, over time, the ability to add more vaults that route liquidity to these various V2 pools, is definitely on the roadmap. And what it effectively does is it's automating the balancing and trying to concentrate that liquidity to maximize yield and make it easier for users because they don't have to go in and actively manage, rebalance. They don't have a concern around liquidity being swapped. So essentially, if the price ranges change too much and you've supplied liquidity into a V2 pool, that liquidity can end up all being forced over to one of the pairs within the pool. And so these vaults try to actively manage it, prevent that from happening, maximize liquidity for users. And so all around great for the end user who's supplying liquidity, But I think it's also helpful for the pool itself, because the more active management that takes place for a pool, the more concentrated liquidity is, the less slippage there is for people who are trying to trade against that pool. So it creates more efficient markets for, in this case, the Saucer Swap V2 pools that they're connected to.
And what other strategies do you envision here? I'm sure there's going to be some other exotic things and other ways we can leverage these.
Yeah, so another strategy that we see like across the board for vault type products in other ecosystems is one that does a leveraged liquid staking yield loop. So this one utilizes decentralized lending protocols, and what it does is for assets that have a base asset and a liquid staking token, let's use HBAR and HBAR for example, because I think that's the most ubiquitous one on Hedera. It's the ability for a user to come to a vault and supply the liquid staking token into that vault. And then what the vault does in its automated management of liquidity is supplying it to a lending protocol, borrowing the base asset from the lending protocol, and then restaking the borrowed asset for a liquid staking token again. And then depending on the vault's strategy, you could loop that multiple times. And so effectively what it's doing is earning staking yield using leverage, and then actively managing it based on, as the prices change between the liquid staking token and the base asset, actively managing it to ensure that there's no issues between those two.
So, Brady, of course, we have new kinds of protocols that are coming online, new tools that are coming out all the time. Is there anything else as far as strategies that you're thinking about, or things that you want to tell the rest of the community?
Yeah, so going back to that developer persona, it is a permissionless protocol. There's the ability for anybody to come in who has a strategy in their mind that they want to automate and build that into a vault and have that approved and then deployed to make available for anybody. So, one of the things that we're actively trying to do is, as documentation rolls out for this product, is being able to enable developers to take the strategies that they have and get creative with it and be able to build those as a vault and have that deployed for the ecosystem. And there's a number of different rankings and categories that are applied to vaults. So when you go into a vault, it'll tell you like which protocols are involved, which assets are involved, a safety score. There's an audit requirement for the vault as well in order to get it approved. So there's a number of things that help users determine whether a strategy or specific vault is maybe the right thing or the wrong thing for them.
And of course, with AI, the line between just regular community members, people, degens, and those developers is going to blur all the time. So people are going to be able to get more involved and really tailor some of these vaults to exactly what they want to do. So how do you see this impacting the broader DeFi ecosystem?
Yeah, so one thing that this we believe is going to do when it goes live is contribute to overall TVL on Hedera. When you look at TVL across other DeFi ecosystems and networks in the space, it's often that, for better or worse, that TVL can be double counted in different ways. So oftentimes funds that are borrowed from maybe a lending protocol end up being supplied to a decentralized exchange. And when you think about the funds that are locked in both of those protocols, it's often the same liquidity, but it's counted as multiple times. And I think that's one of the ways that when you look at TVL metrics for different ecosystems that you see much larger amounts. And Hedera's DeFi ecosystem is starting to evolve. And as more protocols come online, we'll start to see some of that same type of activity. Ultimately, I think DeFi Llama should be able to do various things to determine whether or not some of this liquidity is double counted and figure out ways of normalizing it across the space. But because that is the game that's being played, I think it's good that Hedera is starting to play that game as well. And so how I see it is, as liquidity is supplied to vaults, that counts as TVL. And then as it's routed and actively managed in other protocols across the ecosystem, that's additional TVL as well. So overall TVL, I think, is a great thing. The second thing is benefits to just the broad DeFi ecosystem. The fact that these vaults do route liquidity to other protocols across the ecosystem opens up this opportunity, to be able to grow liquidity and bootstrap these various DeFi projects and back to a first talking point, especially new DeFi protocols. I'm hoping that we start to see some new ones come online that have additional functionalities that we haven't had available before in the ecosystem.
The other thing that I'm excited about is, that over time we're going to shift from, all the stuff that's happening in the DeGen space, all of the native Web3 stuff into more traditional assets. And having this infrastructure like the vaults is going to be invaluable for all of the strategies that we want to deploy in that traditional financial system. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as we start to get into RWAs more, or maybe tokenized equities, I think as long as the path that's taken on that is that there's still a permissionless nature to them, I could see vaults and a lot of the protocols that we have in DeFi on Hedera and other networks being used for some of these real world assets that are starting to come online. And at the very least, I think stablecoin liquidity is a big one. Being able to maybe bridge between the two worlds, if there is a crypto DeFi world and a real world assets world. Stablecoins do kind of act as like a thread between those two in many ways. And so being able to access liquidity of crypto assets with stablecoins that can then be brought into platforms that allow you access into tokenized equities, real world assets, things of that nature. I see that as a thread, and this definitely would help support that.
Well covered. Now, let's talk about timeline a little bit. When are these vaults going to be available, and what else do people need to know about them?
Yeah, so vaults should be ready within Q3 of this year. And, there's going to be additional blog postings that come out on the Bonzo Finance Labs blog, threads related to better understanding, how vaults actually work with diagrams and, visuals to be able to get an inside look at what that looks like. And then, for developers, documentation. So trying to get docs out there to get folks tinkering and building, or at the very least, just learning and understanding how vaults work and how maybe when they do go live, developers can jump in and start to build strategies and get those deployed.
Well, exciting stuff. Brady, before we let you go, is there anything else you'd like to touch on?
Just generally excited for the DeFi ecosystem in general on Hedera. I feel like there's been so much momentum and movement. We've got new protocols that are coming online this year. There's Bonzo Vaults obviously is going to be big, and just excited in general. It's an exciting time for Hedera for sure.
There's no question about that. The markets are heating up. It's a perfect time to be launching new products like this. Brady, congratulations on all the success you've had so far with Bonzo Finance, and I can't wait to get these vaults out.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
I'm now posting these interviews of Hedera builders independently to my channel. The community, influencers, and media outlets are free to use this content to spread the word on what's being built on Hedera. Once they're all uploaded, you'll be able to go to my channel and search for whatever topic or team you're interested in to find more information. Or you'll be able to get the most recent Hedera news by watching the latest HBAR Weekly update. So check them out.